to our subject professor, Dr. Wilfred C. Alaba. Classmates, good evening everyone. In collaboration with Dr. James Paglinawan, who is also one of the experts of instructional systems design, we are tasked to discuss on establishing performance objectives and performance measurements and instructional design process. So earlier, he presented or discussed the first part of our topic, which is on establishing performance objectives and performance measurements. So by this time, I'm going to discuss now instructional design process. So let us first know what would be the learning targets of this discussion. So at the end of this discussion, everyone is expected to identify and apply designs in the teaching learning process. Second, it's analyze learning environment. Third, formulate learning objectives. Fourth, develop learning resources. And the last one is we're going to evaluate learners' learning. Now, since we are talking about here instructional system design process, let us first discuss or define what is instructional design. So it is, by the way, a systematic plan adapted for enhancing and experiences in human learning. It's as well a process of instructional designing, which includes analysis of learners' profile by listing instructional objectives, goal, development of materials, and then, of course, planning of intervention. Now, since instructional design, it's a process, we also have to know what are the processes involved in making an instructional design. So the first one is the ADDIE approach. So ADDIE is actually the generic model, or it's a generic approach used by traditional instructional designers or even today's instructional designers. So after that, it's on the learning environment analysis. Third, designing for learning. Then developing learning resources. And the last one is evaluating learning. So let us first discuss what is ADDIE approach. So by the way, ADDIE approach is the generic process, as I said earlier, traditionally used by instructional designers and even the modern instructional designers up to this time, including training developers. So by the way, the ADDIE stands for its 5 phases or stages. The first one, it's analysis. Second, it's design. Third, development. Fourth, implementation. Next is evaluation. So these are, by the way, representation of a flexible guideline in building effective training and performance support tool. Okay? So let's now proceed to the detail of this ADDIE approach. The first one is analysis. So problems here are clarified. Problems here are identified. Once these are all identified, we will now have to analyze the nature, the characteristics of these problems. Why? From that then, that would be our basis, or we call it as the benchmarking part where we can make solutions on the problem that we are going to address later on. Then after that, it's now on the design phase. So because problems are already analyzed, now you can think, if you're a teacher, you can now think what could be your solution to that problem. You think of a solution that could address that certain problem. For example, you administered pre-test and you have found out that these are um, the stock knowledge or the prior knowledge of your students. So this would be the way or the process on how are you going to teach your students. Now, this is what do we call as design phase, where you as a teacher, you can formulate with a contextualized learning objective, and then how would that be able to attain? You have to design desired learning performance to be, of course, performed by your students. And how can that be measured? So, of course, we use assessment instruments. It could be a written instrument, or it could be in a form of what is this? It could be in a form of the actual performance, which will be assessed using rubrics. Then we also have here content, the subject matter analysis, and the lesson planning, including the media selection. The next phase, it's development phase. So it's now the time here that instructional designers and developers create and assemble the content assets that were blueprinted or decided in the design phase. And then after that, it would be implementation phase, where this includes the testing of prototypes, the targeted audience, putting the product in full production, and trainers, the learners, and instructors in using the product. And the last one, which is on evaluation. So the evaluation phase consists of two parts, the formative and summative. Accordingly, we can do formative assessment in most of the stages of ADI approach. Like we can administer formative assessment during analysis, during developing, during the evaluation part, of course. And for summative, it could either be you want to administer examination during or even after the output is being seen. Like for example, once you have found out that, for example, in a collaborative activity, and you have found out that your students are presenting the exact content, and since all of them will be grade would have the same what is this would have the same grade, and would want to know how each other differs. So it's now your time to give summative assessment, because it might be that the other one maybe is not helping, the other three are not helping, and it's only one who is maybe working. So it's now your time to determine how your students learn in doing that actual experience. So you can give them the summative examination. Okay? There are, aside from ADI model, there are also other approaches that we can use. The first one is the Azure model. So Azure stands for analyzing the learner, stating the objectives, selecting media, selecting methods, selecting materials, utilizing media and materials, requiring participation, and then evaluating and then revising. So this is actually an instructional design approach that helps organize thoughts and create product for use in the classroom. And then the other one that I could share it with you here is the PI model, which stands for planning, implementation, and evaluation. So the distinctions between planning and evaluation are not always clear. This cycle is described in many different ways, with various phases described by both planners and evaluators. Usually, the first stage of such a cycle is the planning phase, which is designed to elaborate a set of potential actions, programs, or technologies and selecting the best for implementation. Other considerations in following the stages of instructional design is we have to identify the learner's characteristics and learning style. We all know that in our classrooms, we do have sets of students having different characteristics and having different styles, the way how they would learn the concept, how the way how they would learn from you as a teacher. So in here, students learn in a wide variety of setting, such as indoor and outdoor environment. There's a need to link their experiences acquired beyond the four wall of the classroom. And then another stage for instructional design process is designing learning. So we have here factors to consider: the content as well as the strategies, which are expected to be contextualized in relevance to our learning objectives. And also, it must be genderized. It should be racially sensitive that promotes concern related to environmental awareness, peace-oriented values, inclusion that recognize constitutional values and scientific temper. And also, we have here development of learning resources. So how can we develop our resources as a teacher? So we can have a varied, a selected